Hey, it's Rod Yates here. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode, I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey, and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my special guest today is the Darkness guitarist, Dan Hawkins. Now, when the Darkness released their debut album, Permission to Land, in 2003, there wasn't a lot of rock and roll in the charts. There were a few exceptions like Metallica and Linkin Park, but the biggest hits were coming from singer-songwriters like Norah Jones and rappers like 50 Cent. The Darkness, though, were a throwback to the hard rock riffing of the 70s and the over-the-top theatrics of the 80s glam metal scene, topped off with a uniquely British sense of humour that led many to question whether they were just a joke band. Clearly they weren't, and 2 decades on, the Darkness are still going strong, having survived the massive personal and professional crash that followed the success of Permission to Land, which hit number 1 in the UK and sold millions around the world. Dan talks about that whole rise and fall in this interview, as well as his upbringing in the UK, the band's early days, their ongoing success, and much more. But we started by talking about Motorheart, the Darkness's brand new studio album, which Dan produced. I was having a look at your Instagram and flicking back to when Easter is Cancelled was released, and you put a message up saying Easter is cancelled out, etc., and you finished that message by saying it nearly killed me, or it almost killed me. How did you fare this time around?
Pretty much the same deal, really. No, it's I suppose because I'm in the band, I'm engineering the album, I'm producing it, and then ultimately I'm mixing it. There's quite a lot of pressure there, I suppose, and I'm incredibly invested in everything that I do. You know, I'm not a half measures man by any means. I wish I was. It tends to be quite an intense thing. It's funny when I produce other bands or other artists, it's so much easier because you're outside of the thing looking in, and it's quite easy to see what it is that needs to be done. Whereas when it's your own band and sometimes there always seems to be no limitations when you can change anything at any point. It can be quite testing. And this album was particularly difficult because the deadline that I had for it, because you'd think during making a lockdown, COVID album that you'd have all the time in the world and no distractions. But the lead time for vinyl is so huge because there's a shortage of vinyl in the world and vinyl plants. It was almost like a mad dash to the finish line 8 months before it was even sort of announced. It was crazy.
Wow.
And the weird thing is the rest of the guys just sat around literally doing nothing and just chilling out. And I'm literally like paddling like a duck underwater, like just desperately trying to get this thing finished in time for the label,
So, I mean, it's not the first time you've taken all those roles on, though. Is there an element of you that thrives on the pressure, or is it a control thing? What is it that compels you to take on all those roles?
Well, I suppose it's an obsession with the recording, I suppose, and producing. I've always kind of been obsessed with it, and I like to. I don't know. Maybe it is control. Actually, who am I kidding? It's just It's it's one of those things. I think I inherited that from my dad. Like I'm useless at kind of physical things. Like building things or fixing stuff, because my dad, if I had a Lego set for Christmas, and I'd ask him for help, or he'd see that I was doing it wrong, he would just go in and finish it himself,
Right.
It's like, he would fix anything and just, he couldn't stand things taking longer than they should or being done incorrectly. So there probably is an element of that there.
Okay. Because he was a builder, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So you got his work ethic and that love of fixing things, or the love of control, but perhaps not the ability to fix or build.
Not the fixing things. Yeah. I'm terrible at fixing. I'm good at building, but fixing, no.
Right. What else do you think that you inherited from your dad?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. His work ethic, 100%. I think in a kind of almost negative way, I'm the same as him, where I can't really just sit down and even watch TV because my foot starts wobbling, and I feel like I could be doing something else. Like I feel like if I haven't produced something, not necessarily musical, but like actually done something worthwhile every single day, I end up almost going into a spiral of depression.
Right.
Like I have to achieve something. And sometimes that might be, if I literally can't work or there's something that I can't actually do anything, there's nothing to do, I'll basically find the ingredients for a meal, like a really extravagant meal, and I'll spend, like, my mission that day will be to cook it to perfection, and like throw myself in at the deep end and stress myself out doing that.
So how do you go on the road then when there's so much downtime?
On the road is almost my respite. It's weird that, like, the work, what people consider to be my work, is when I have my rest, really. Rest from being a father of 3 children with a huge house and estate to look after, a studio, running a studio, a livery yard. And also, in a way, because you're trapped on that bus for so much time, you're almost forced to down tools, like almost mentally. So yeah, that's my respite.
And that studio you mentioned, which is on your estate, which is where I think you recorded Motorheart. Is it literally a horse stable?
Yes, it is. Yeah. It's not so much now because it's been changing over the course of this album. In fact, it's basically got bigger by the month over the last year and a half, and I'm into the next stage now where I have a large barn, so I finally get a large live area, and it's getting bigger and bigger. So yeah, during the making of this album, I could literally smell the horse piss and shit from the stable next door. And the funny thing is, and I'm sure equestrian people will attest to this, horses seem to be attracted by music,
Really?
So yeah, it's the weirdest thing. Like, as soon as I would crank the volume in the control room, or if I was recording drums or whatever, I'd hear the activity in the field shelter next to me. They would come in and they'd start kicking the walls. You could hear them shuffling about to kind of jostling for position to listen to what was going on, But
you've got a good song if you get frenzy of activity next door.
Maybe it's all the galloping metal they could hear.
And I saw an interview with your brother, Justin, obviously the singer and the frontman of The Darkness, talking about Jussie's Girl, the song Jussie's Girl, and saying that sonically you were aiming for somewhere in between Billy Ocean and Def Leppard. Does that ring true for you?
I love it. That's my brother all over, isn't it? Yeah. But I can't say Billy Ocean really appeared at all in my processing, but there was definitely an ode to Def Leppard on that one.
Right.
It's like trying to use all those kind of 80s recording techniques. It was fun because I had carte blanche as usual.
Nice.
But we did some interesting sort of tricks there where I mic'd up a nail gun. Because the builders were, they're building part of the studio while we're recording. So it's almost like, please, can you hammer in time kind of thing. And I stepped out to tell them to stop at one point because we were recording drums. And just at that point, one of them let off the nail gun. And I'm like, that is the most awesome crack of a snare drum I've ever heard. So I recorded that and laid it onto the snare. As well as I think we recorded 40 Haze, which is a Mutt Lang technique, and added that to the snare drum. Just things like that. That's the advantage of having your own studio, and you can kind of take the extra time to experiment and have fun with the recording rather than the clock ticking all the time.
Yeah. What did you say? Did you say 40 Haze? What's that?
Yeah. Okay, so I had my guitar tech, Ian Norfolk, and his wife, Mimi. Basically, I got them to go, hey, like 40 times, and then layer them on top of each other, and then put that on the snare drum just slightly under. And that's a tried and tested mega Mutt Lang snare trick.
All right.
Oh, getting technical now, aren't we?
little tricks of the trade. And I saw another reference which Justin had been saying was quite important to the album for him anyway, was Guns N' Roses. What about for you? What were some of the references that were important to you? Yeah,
I mean, I guess it's funny, like the references, I never really look at a song and want to approach it from the sound of another band, but quite often, like when he's soloing, there was a few instances on the record where I was encouraging him, I suppose, to really channel that kind of Slash thing, because Justin is such an amazingly gifted technical guitar player in a similar way to Slash. He can do that stuff. And he doesn't always do it because I guess maybe the background of the band is more melodic than that, I suppose. And And I suppose maybe the backing tracks lent itself to it this time because the album's definitely more, I suppose, kind of old school rock than previous ones. Yeah, so 100% would be channeling, Guns N' Roses in those scenarios. But I tend to let the song guide me what to do sonically and arrangement wise, and production wise. Quite often that's why our albums sound quite eclectic, because I don't bother trying to pull it into like a definitive sound of an album, which is good and bad, because we have albums that kind of can sound quite fractured, I think, and it's not like all the songs are vying for position for best rock song. It's like, sometimes you get halfway through a Darkness album and think, what the hell is that? What's that doing there? But I guess I'm always trying to make the guitars sound as huge as I can. It's always a battle, jostling for position, for everything, trying to sound louder than everything else.
That's it. And you mentioned briefly your dad before, and I wanted to, go back quite a long way to chart your course to this place. And you grew up in Lowestoft in England. What kind of place is that? Can you describe it for me? Well,
I mean, Lowestoft was a great place to grow up. I mean, we started life in Suffolk, which is in a little village called Darsham, which was a 6-mile kind of bus ride to primary school. It was really quite remote for England. That's pretty remote. It really was just the idyllic kind of rural upbringing. I mean, it was me, my brother and my sister, and freedom, basically, and the Suffolk countryside, And then when Justin went to middle school, and subsequently I did the year after, we found that, Justin was bullied a bit, and it was quite tough at that school. And I looking back, I put it down to the fact that it was, again, very, very rural middle school, quite big. And you're bringing all these groups of people like us out of the countryside who had no real social skills and throwing them into a melting pot with a load of really evil teachers and a rubbish school, to be fair.
Right.
So there was enough bullying going on that my parents said, right, we're getting you out of here. We need to get you to somewhere where you can get a bit more street cred, people behave properly, and so on and so forth. So we moved to Lowestoft, which is a town of, I think when we were there, about 75,000 people.
Okay.
And immediately life was loads better. There were really great kind of friendship groups. There was a great music scene. The football, it was like the main thing. There was just hundreds of football teams, and you had the beach there.
Right.
And so, I could sit here and say, Lowestoft, Morrissey had it right. It was a seaside town they forgot to shut down, kind of thing. But it wasn't really like that in my memory. It was kind of, it was great, And the best thing about it was the music scene, because every pub, there were so many pubs, every single one of them had live bands pretty much every night. Right. Everyone was in a band. The youth club had rehearsal facilities, and, it was great. It was certainly when I was 17, I had to get out of school education and move to London to try and make something. I just knew that I wouldn't make it in music if I didn't move away from that town, but it was a good launching point,
So obviously when you moved to London, music is what you want to pursue, but when did that even become on your radar? Was it while you were in Lowestoft and these bands were playing and presumably you had more access to music? Is that when music actually, became something that you wanted to pursue?
I wanted to be a professional musician already when I was 13, 14.
Okay.
And I couldn't understand why bands like Swerve Driver, a band who I was hugely into, I sent them my CV with literally a Polaroid, and when I heard that the bass player had left,
right.
I wanted an audition, and I just knew I could do it, and because I could do it, because I could play. I knew everything, and but I had absolutely no experience. I was absolutely, it was never going to work. But in my mind, at the time, I couldn't understand why they didn't get back to me for like a year, and they said no,
But they actually did get back to you.
They did get back to me, and I've actually got the letter here, and it was, I treasure that, because it's like, good on them. It was like a year after the event.
Right.
And bear in mind, this is before the internet, really, so it was a handwritten note to them, and it was a typed signed letter back from their management company, which I just think is just absolutely brilliant.
Absolutely.
It's really that human sort of, someone there actually cared enough for a year after they'd already got someone.
Yeah.
They went through all those letters and they replied to every applicant, including me. So
wow,
that was a lesson for me in how to treat people, I think.
Yeah, because Swerve Driver, was that the first band that you ever saw live?
It was the second, I think.
Okay.
The first one was Eccentrics, which is
really?
like this
Thrash
band.
band.
Those good. Yeah. You know your stuff. If you know Eccentrics, you know what you're talking about. And they had and Skyclad were supporting them.
Pagan metal.
Yeah, I can't believe you know those two bands. I'm really, really impressed. Honestly, that's like mind blowing. That's mind blowing. Wow. So I'm at the Norwich waterfront. Wow, this is incredible. I must have only been 14 at the time, and down the front, and Skyclad come on, and just like in all these crazy kind of like medieval kind of pagan outfits, masks on. I suppose they were a precursor to Slipknot in a way. But yeah, no, just absolutely blowing my mind. It was so heavy.
Yeah.
And Eccentrics were just phenomenal. But it wasn't really, I was at that point in my career. At that point, I was actually a drummer playing in a thrash metal band, and
really,
it was the guys in that band that took me along. And I was playing kind of early Metallica covers and Anthrax and all this kind of stuff in this band with much older kids than me.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like that's why I went to that. But I suppose a year later, I'd left that band and I was a bass player by then actually, and Swerve Driver were my absolute favourite band, and I went to see them, and
right.
That was just amazing. Yeah.
Was that band that you mentioned doing the Metallica covers, was that Vital Signs?
No, we were called Seraphim. Vital Signs was the band I was in when I was 12, I think. I joined that band.
Okay.
I was gigging with Justin in that band at that point, and then I was drumming in thrash metal. The funniest, I've told this story a few times, but I couldn't afford a double bass drum pedal. Right. I don't know if there's, hopefully a lot of musos will be listening to this, but drummers will know what I mean by that. It's when you hear a bass drum going, right. Like, it's like
Lombardo special.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, back in the day, you'd have two bass drums.
That's right.
And then there was this technical breakthrough where you can have two bass drum pedals operating one bass drum, so and they alternate like that with left and right.
Yeah.
So I needed to do those parts, but I couldn't afford a second bass drum, and I couldn't afford a double bass drum pedals. So I just put two bass drum pedals on one bass drum. So whenever it came time to do the double bass drum part, I'd have to flip my left leg past the snare drum, and I looked ridiculous, like knees together, playing these thrash metal parts. And then there was this gig we did at this school in Beccles, and I'll never forget it. I came to like the first song where I had to go and do that. Showtime, here we go. And then got excited and just knocked the snare drum over with my, and so like there's just dig with me trying to pick up the snare drum. But
good times.
Yeah, great time.
So what happens then when you head off to London and you're still, so you leave school early, is that right? Did you graduate or you left school early? Okay. And your parents were you had their blessing?
So I did my GCSEs, so got through high school, did pretty well, couple of A's, mostly B's. I was one of those people that if I didn't like the teacher, I just wouldn't turn up.
Right.
But if I did get on with a teacher, I would be an A-star student, and that's reflected in my grades. It's weird. You've got like 2 A's in English, A in history, B's in sciences or whatever, and then you get to art, and it's U for ungraded, which means it's the worst grade you could possibly get because it means you sat the exam And even though you submitted your work for that exam, they didn't grade it. It wasn't worth a grade.
That surprises me. I would have thought art would be...
Yeah, I dropped out of music as well
Did
in
you?
high school because the teacher was a complete prick. I basically, I don't know. Art, it should be about creativity first and foremost, and doing what you want to do, not being told what to do.
Yeah, totally. So you head down to London, and
I'm waffling away.
That's all right. What awaits you there?
So I left school with good GCSEs. My brother had gone on to do A levels, and he was a triple A star student after 1 year,
right,
in psychology, English, and something history, I think it was.
So A levels are like the last 2 years of school, right?
That's right, yeah. So that's the kind of they're the grades that you use to get into the university of choice, sort of thing. So he was halfway through that, but it is optional. You don't have to do A levels. But and he dropped out after a year, having been estimated grades of A stars, basically. And it really made me think. And he basically thought he didn't want to be part of the. He hated the bureaucracy of it, which is something I hated as well about school. And he went to start this music technology course in Huddersfield up north and disappeared. And I'm like, I'm just about to leave school. And I saw him do that and I thought, well, what chance have I got? I was kidding myself because basically my path would have been almost 100% sure English teacher.
Really?
I was quite inspired by my English teacher. I'm I consider myself quite widely read, even though I don't sound like I am. But I just thought, well, if my brother can't do it because he's a damn sight smarter than me, then what chance have I got? And I thought, well, what do I actually want to do? And I really wanted to go to the School of Audio Engineering, SAE, which is like this training course for engineers and producers based in London. But it was a private course and it was very expensive. And we didn't have the money. My parents had the money. There's no way I could get the money or funding for it. So that was that. But it's, that's what I really wanted to do. And in my National Record of Achievement, the document you have when you leave school, it says in the back there, I would like to be an engineer or a producer in a recording studio. Do you know what? Actually, hold on a second. I've actually got it here, weirdly.
All right.
Yeah, this is so weird. Can't believe I'm doing this. Sorry.
That's all right.
I just want to prove to you that it's true. I couldn't believe it when I dug this out when we moved house recently, and it's like wow, that says it all. Here we go. So, personal statement. Yes, here we go. Right. So, I have in the past played football up to county level until, unfortunately, injury prevented me from pursuing this career because I was pretty good at football.
All
I was
right.
on the books for Ipswich and stuff. However, I find that the emphasis on the future and my general pastime entertainment is in music, playing with many different musicians and bands, as well as performing and recording. I have a Porter studio at home on which I record demos and my own compositions. From this, I've developed an ambition to be a sound engineer or producer.
Wow. So you wrote that in your final...
That's 16-year-old me.
That's awesome.
Isn't that crazy? So, it's wild. Because I have no memory of that. And then we moved house and I was like, oh, wow, look at that.
Very nicely written.
And, as I said, like English teacher in the making. But yeah, so I moved to London as a musician. But really, that was... if I'd have gone on that course, I have no doubt I would be an engineer or producer, and
right.
And all this music stuff wouldn't have happened. Thank God.
So in London at that time, I'm guessing this is sort of mid to late 90s. So you're probably thinking, so it's probably Britpop, and then bands like Stereophonics and Feeder are coming out. The Verve are really hitting their stride. Yeah. Where did you fit?
Yeah, do you know what? Friends of mine who were with me at the time in that group, we refer to it as the 60s because the 90s were like only how I can imagine the 60s must have felt in comparison to what people have now,
right.
The pressures of social media and I guess the lack of bands and excitement about rock music and guitars in general in this country it's just very flat. It's very flat at the moment. It has been for years. But there were all these bands like Radiohead, Oasis, Blur, all vying for number one on a weekly sort of basis, and huge gigs, live music going through the roof. And I lived in Camden during that time.
Right.
And it was just all the musicians in one place, and it was amazing. It was a real education. But when I first moved to London, I didn't have a clue. I basically worked with my dad as a builder between 16 and 17. And then a friend of mine who I used to be in a band with in Lowestoft got me a job in Chelsea as a receptionist for this graphics company.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I got that job, because during the interview, I accidentally stood on the MD's dog, and I really hurt it,
Oh, no.
And I actually made a joke during the interview. I said, "Well, that's it then. Shall I just go?" And I think that's what got me the job. But obviously, had a sense of humour under pressure. But so that I'm waffling again. Yeah. So, but I was in London working in this job 13 hours a day, looking through the back of the Enemy or the Melody Maker at the time, replying to band adverts, trying to find some like-minded musicians. And it took me about a year, maybe a year and a half, to find some musicians that I really clicked with, and it was a pretty lonely time really for that period. I was basically just working and being worked into the ground really, and for literally no money, and just exhausted and lonely. I used to go back to Lowestoft all the time, nearly every weekend, and I would say, everyone would go like, "How's it going in London?" It's like, "Yeah, absolutely brilliant." And then I'm sure they must have been thinking, "Well, why are you here then?" But once I did find some like-minded musicians, it just kind of went on from there. Okay. One of the first musicians I met was a guy called Ben Etchells, who was one of the guitarists in a band called Tiny Monroe, who were quite big in the 90s in the UK. And he was forming a new band. And we just clicked straight away. Bear in mind, I was still a bass player at that time.
Right.
And he was a guitarist, and we became best friends straight away. And the bass player in that band that he was forming, the guitarist was Frankie Poulain. So he was the guitarist, I was the bass player. And Frankie and I go back a really long way. And he and I ended up living in lots of flats together, and we even shared a studio, like a one-bedroom studio flat, for a couple of years in Primrose Hill. So, but yeah, it was an exciting time. It was poverty,
right?
Absolutely no doubt about it. I don't think I ate anything other than pot noodles and peanut butter on toast for about 5 years.
Wow.
And but it was great because it was just all your money went on beer and socializing. Really, so.
Well, let's fast forward a few years to you mentioned Frankie there. So at some point, Justin comes down and joins you in London, and I think Empire is the name of the band that eventually morphs into The Darkness. How does that all go about? And then you've got Ed on drums and Frankie on bass, and you're on guitar now. How does that go down?
So Empire was it's so convoluted. I won't bore you with with the personnel changes and the way it morphed, but basically this band Empire had a few people come and go, and we were trying different singers for a really long time, because the original singer we had, we didn't really get on with his voice, with what we were trying to do. So we parted ways and started looking for a new singer. And we spent 2 years auditioning singers, and actually quite a lot of time not even bothering. We were just making sort of progressive sounding music, and it kind of just went on and on and on and on. At that point, Frankie was the bass player, I was the guitarist, and Justin was the keyboard player / second guitarist, And we kind of just sort of struggled on for a couple of years, and in the end we just gave up. We just thought, well, we're never going to find the singer. It was just so demoralizing. You get your hopes up, you meet people, and they just never had that thing. It's just like it was never right. It never excited us. So in the end, we kind of gave up, and we kind of disbanded, and I started doing session guitar work for a girl called Liz Horsman, who was signed to Food Records, EMI. Mm-hmm. And so I did that for about a year and a half. And during that period, Justin was making music for adverts. And and Frankie went to Venezuela to become a tour guide in the jungle. That is actually a true story. And the drummer Steve went back to his, he was like kind of doing a mastering job at the time, I think, working for a mastering house. So we were all into music, and all our friends are musicians, and, you know, we're all kind of making music and doing various things. And in the end, it was a party at my auntie's house, auntie's pub, the Swan in Gillingham. And Justin was just doing what he does, you know, just dancing and mucking about. And it was Bohemian Rhapsody, I think it was, that came on. Very much, don't know why we were all dancing, must have been hammered, but the whole family was like dancing. And then he just took centre stage and was acting. Everyone was just crying with laughter at what he was doing. And I just thought, this is the X Factor. This is what has been missing in everyone we've auditioned for the last 2 years. And I was thinking, well, God, who cares if he can sing? Just stick him on stage and just get him to do that. It literally, and I actually thought, well, do you know what? What's the worst case scenario? He sounds like Marquis Smith. You know, they've worked for Marquis Smith. Like, so I was like, just look, you're bored of what you're doing. I want to do something new. Let's start a band together. The very worst that could happen is that we end up being a Queen covers band, and we can play here 3 times a week because, you know, Auntie Chris will book us, and that's it. Let's make a pact, never to stop. You know, regardless of whether we're famous or whether we end up as a pub band, let's just stick with it. That's one of the reasons I think we made it as a band, is because from that very moment that we decided to start a band together, a proper band, give it a go, it wasn't about being famous, being rich, being successful. It wasn't about that. It was never about that. It was, let's do this because we want to be in a band together. We love the same music and we love each other. Let's go and do it, regardless of the outcome. You know, knowing full well that we may end up just playing pubs for the rest of our lives in covers band, but let's do it because this is what we love. Yeah. And that was it. And then it was a case of, right, so if we're going to do this band that we love, and it's about love, not money, not fame, not chasing what the trend is, because that was one of the big mistakes we'd made in Empire. Mm-hmm. We were constantly trying to be relevant, you know. Let's be completely irrelevant and let's just have fun. So, you know, we knew loads of amazing musicians at that point in time, but we wanted people who would literally die for the band, right, and that we could trust. And it was obvious, really. Ed, I'd known Ed since I was 14. I was in a band with him, and I knew that he wanted to move to London. So I got him to London. He was playing with this punk band at the time, so he was ready to join a proper band. Not saying that I think Q-Sling was the band. We had to poach him, and they weren't happy about it, but he was ready, and he was just a mate, you know. And Justin called Frankie, or maybe even wrote him a letter at the time, or sent him an email. It was the early days of emails. And said, Dan and I are starting a band. This is the one. This is it. I'm going to be the singer. And Frankie was like, I'm in. And he literally, the next week, he was back in London.
Wow.
Literally moved.
That's awesome.
It shows you how much faith he had in Justin and I, you know. And that was it. Wow. I've had too much coffee. I'm rambling here. Sorry.
After the break, Dan talks about the success of The Darkness's debut album, the personal and professional crash that followed it, and his battle with cancer. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Dan Hawkins. It took a while, but eventually people caught on. And when did you realise that actually, all right, we're getting somewhere here? Was it after your first album, Permission to Land, was out? Was there a buzz growing before that? When did you sense actually this is going to work?
So we started in 2000, probably around 2001 and a half. We've been playing for a year and a half, pretty much in the same club in London. It's like 150 capacity little bar called the Monarch. They changed to Barfly, but we had someone that would book us there. But the only slot we could get was Saturday nights, because all the midweek slots would be taken by the serious bands, because they knew that A&R people wouldn't go and see them at weekends, because A&R people go back to their country houses.
Right.
And so they go and work during the week. So we got that Saturday night slot. And after pretty much a year and a half of playing there every other Saturday, probably realistically, and constantly writing, constantly trying to push ourselves, we started filling that room. That we'd be doing like sold out club shows without having released any music. And yeah, I mean, there was a buzz about the band because people couldn't believe that these guys were doing this. You know, it got to have been the most uncool band on the planet at that point in time, you know. Bear in mind, the backdrop is Coldplay, Radiohead, you know, it's all like, you know, very serious stuff. Manic Street Preachers, who I love, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, like I think, you know, if you tolerate this, then your children will be next. That was number one, you know.
Right.
That shows you the general sort of like post sort of 90s kind of thing going on there. But
did you revel in being outsiders?
100%, yeah. Yeah, and we kept that kind of punk attitude that we started the band with to the very, well, still to this day, you know. Probably a little less so because we're older or whatever. But, you know, couldn't care less. Like if A&R people turned up to a show, we fully expected them to leave after 5 minutes. We couldn't care less. There wasn't that kind of like tingle of nerves. Oh, there's an industry in the crowd tonight. Couldn't give a shit. It was like, I remember after a year and a half of doing it, we sold the place out and we got paid 50 quid each. And I just felt like an absolute god, you know. So around that time, yeah, just before 2000 or just into 2002, we were playing the whole first album pretty much.
Okay.
Live. That was our set.
Yeah.
And we hadn't released a record. Like no one would sign us because they didn't know what to do with us. Didn't know how the hell to market this mess. And playing pretty much music that was outlawed in the 90s.
When it did actually break through, given that you weren't doing it for that reason, but when it did break through and it broke through big, I think, what did that first Permission to Land sold? 1.5 million copies in the UK, I think. How did you adjust to that?
I think it's considerably more than that now, actually. But,
is it?
Yeah, I think so. So that was crazy. You know, one of the best decisions we ever made was going with what I really wanted to happen. I made happen was the label that we signed to. So there's a guy called Corder Marshall who is like a brilliant A&R MD of this label that Ash was signed to at the time. And it's just so we signed with them just as they were bought out by Warner's. So we kind of signed an independent deal with people that we really liked working with, like Corder Marshall and Max Lusada, who's now MD at Warner's, just as they were integrated into this huge machine and had all these kind of like major label facilities and a point to prove. So it went from signing like this sensible, almost like not indie deal, but like sort of mid-level kind of label deal to it being this project, I think, for them to let's see how far we can knock this ball into the back of the net internationally. And the timing was perfect, really. And I just wonder what would happen if we had signed with someone else. I just think they invested a lot in us and did a really, really great job. I mean, we were our own worst enemy in the end because of the workload and how rock and roll we were treating ourselves during the end of that period. And it was our undoing. But it was I could never lay a finger of blame on the label because, yeah, that's the reason why you and I are probably having this discussion because it wasn't just a weird thing that happened in the UK and then, an indie release that kind of like it had a cult following. They put the ball in the back of the net. And to be fair, we didn't expect that to happen at all. Yeah. It was huge.
Yeah.
It went mega and really quickly. Just before the album came out, we were supporting Def Leppard at Brixton Academy. And I had to get the bus to that gig. Like I literally didn't have the money for the tube, And then probably 6 months later, we were on a private jet, doing Top of the Pops special in Switzerland, having done something the day before, which didn't give us enough time to do it. But the label were like, we need you there. We'll put you on a jet. It's that kind of thing,
Does that mess with your head?
You probably, I think, yeah, over time, I don't know. We're pretty grounded.
Okay.
It may not seem like that, but it's going to mess with anyone's head, I think.
Yeah, sure.
But it wasn't like we were throwing caviar at each other, and it was a bit of a blur. We were just having a party the whole time. It was a riot.
Yeah.
And the thing is, everyone around us wanted to party because they couldn't actually believe it was happening. It was like almost like 80s rock again, the whole 80s thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people working in the industry who'd had to go through the lean time of like the 90s where you weren't allowed to be like that anymore. We're like, right, here we go again. Yeah. So we were the guinea pigs for a lot of people's vices, I think.
I guess you move on to your second album, One Way Ticket to Hell and Back. And I've seen a quote from you where you talk about, you said, our second album, it sounds like a drum machine because everything was so uptight. Was that
Yeah.
the pressure? Was that just trying to follow up Permission to Land and finding yourself in this studio crippled by the pressure?
Yes, I'd say there were a few factors there. I mean, Justin was struggling with some well-documented sort of issues as far as this intake of various things go. I was struggling with the pressure put on us, and also I could sense that the band weren't really together. Everyone was exhausted and probably needed a break. I think people have learned. It's funny, like the industry these days. It's I look at people's release schedules at the higher end, the size of band that we used to be, kind of thing. And it's not uncommon for them to go away for a year or two, leave the field fallow, regenerate, have something to sing about, look forward to getting in a room with each other and feel confident about what they're doing. But at the time, it wasn't like that for us. It was like the pressure was on to follow that album up and as soon as possible, and really I think if we'd have had decent management and what should have been got across is that the band was struggling and weren't really talking to each other. Justin wanted out, he'd had enough, he's almost killed himself being the rock star that he thought he should be, and we just had nothing in the tank. But we were in the studio within 2 weeks of the whole of Permission to Land campaign being finished. Literally, it was like packed up like from Reading Festival or whatever, and then 2 weeks later we were in the studio, and that was a bad choice, and that was in a way I think a combination of bad management, inexperience from us, probably bad leadership from band leader, if you can call me that. I was like just too busy trying to fulfill record company commitments and stuff to actually see the wood for the trees, And yeah, we were a mess really. We turned up to start making the album, and I think Ed was so nervous about playing anything, he just couldn't play. Frankie had forgotten how to play bass over the course of the 2 years touring because we hadn't even been in a room rehearsing. We couldn't even hear each other properly for 2 years. Quite often, like when bands go on tour, not so much now because everyone's on in-ears, but when you're playing and it's just like mega loud and ferocious and you can't really hear what you're doing half the time, you need to come together in a dead room and listen to each other properly. That's the one thing I've learned, from that period, is that you can't just keep gigging and gigging and gigging and gigging and expect to be improving as a band. You need to play together and be able to hear each other properly, So we'd all basically just lost our chops and it was sloppy. Everyone hated each other. Everyone felt the pressure. I'd say I loved working with Roy. I think that was my escape from what was happening, was an indulgent thing that I got to do by just getting in Roy's headspace. And it was he and I making that record for the first 3 or 4 months in Rockfield. Justin didn't even turn up. Frankie was out of the band pretty early on. And Ed couldn't really play drums. So we were literally slicing together from drum takes to try and create music for me to play guitar on, a beat to play guitar on.
Wow.
It was carnage.
Yeah.
And it should have been aborted. It should have just stopped. But it didn't. It kind of just dragged on. And we managed to get the album over the finishing line and then went to tour it. And then that was it. It was just, What happened when Justin left the band and the band split up, that should have happened after the first album. We either should have split up or just had 2 years off.
Right.
To kind of like just regroup and refocus. But I think we were greedy. We didn't know how to say no. We'd completely obliterated ourselves with drugs and alcohol. So we just kind of battled on. And it's that thing of like, almost like because it happened so quickly, we thought if we just keep going and keep stoking the fire, it would go out and we'd be back to being bums in Camden. So I think, that was a combination of all those things. So
right.
I think that sums it up, actually. I don't think I've ever actually managed to sum it up properly before, but that was it. Yeah.
And that Roy you mentioned there was Roy Thomas Baker, the producer. So when the band splits, you form Stone Gods very quickly after it with Richie and Ed from The Darkness. Was that the fact that you did it so quickly after, was that almost a coping mechanism? Was that a way of not letting the dream die?
100%. Like we discussed early on, I have to be productive. I have to be moving forwards or doing something. I definitely think it's a coping mechanism, because it was like the same day. I came back from meeting Just and us agreeing to go our separate ways, and literally started making the phone calls that day. And I just had to be doing something, and I'm glad I did, Again, it was one of those things where I kind of went straight from all that to, I tend not to look negatively at things or have that many regrets. So for me, it was like, right, okay, that's ended. And I was gutted because, I hated sort of not, being on bad terms with my brother, and we were at that point. At the same time, I thought, well, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for the studio that I built and finished as a recording studio that Roy actually helped me do. This is my turn to actually get in the studio and really learn how to engineer and properly produce a record. So that was it. So I considered myself not really the guitarist in that band in a weird way. I was just the producer and engineer. And if you look at those Stone Gods records, the first one, because the second one hasn't been released yet. If you take away the few sort of guitar flurries and solos, it's those guys, It's like I didn't play any rhythm guitar. The thing that I do, the one thing I could do. It's like it was, and when it came to putting the solos on top, I really struggled. I was like, God, can you guys just get a lead guitarist? And I was talked out of it. So, but it was very therapeutic, and I had to do something straight away because I just have to do something. It was either that or cook loads of terrible meals, like I told you.
Just last thing about the Stone Gods, you read interviews from back then. You had to spend so much time explaining that it wasn't The Darkness. Was that how it felt?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. It's like anyone who heard it, I think, could hear straight away that it was, it was a different thing completely. Yeah, it was good times. Like good and bad. Because basically it was a recovery period. When I went into making that first Stone Gods album, I stopped drinking, stopped smoking for 6.5 months, I think it was. I was completely free from everything. And it was during that period and 6 months after, I realised that even though it's been well documented about Justin's stint in rehab, I almost certainly should have been in there as well, I think.
Right.
It took me quite a long time to realise that, but it was like, we have just messed up. And, it's like... So in many, many ways, I'm thankful that we did split up and stop. And I had that chance to really become a proper engineer and get to know that trade, And it was a healing time and I really enjoyed it. I mean, Ed was still struggling a bit during that period. And I remember there's one time he was so drunk he couldn't even play a gig. And it was like, I got so angry. I remember like kicking a wall and breaking my foot and hobbling about for the next 2 gigs. And so it wasn't entirely plain sailing, and we were ambitious, and then it wasn't really happening for us. But still, I look back on those as really fond times, and it was exciting doing something new.
Yeah.
And the follow-up album we made with Robin Goodrich on drums was just superb, and the tracking sessions for that album is probably the best I can remember. It was so organised and we were so focused. It was unreal. So it was good times.
Will that come out, that second record?
One day, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually I had a chance to mix it in during the lockdown. There was a large period where I got to kind of finish things that I'd started a decade earlier. And that being one of them. I just thought, well, if I don't do this now, I never will. So,
yeah.
And it came out really good. So it's just it needs to be heard by the world. But the trouble is the Darkness is so busy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to just put it out although it's getting to the point where we might actually just do that, just give it to the world.
Okay.
But I would just love to do just a little tour, like 5 dates, just something to, just so I can see the guys again, rather than just stick this piece of music out that we did 10 years ago. It's funny, I was always very precious and uptight about, other people in the band's projects and things that they do, taking away their focus on the band. I'm not like that anymore. It's like, I think people should be free to be themselves and do what they want. It can only really improve what they do with the band. So I had this sort of like dream of maybe Frank doing poetry, Rufus doing a drum workshop, and then Hot Leg and Stone God's double headliner, and then a huge Darkness sort of like Russian Peace Festival mess at the end. The Moscow Peace Festival.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that kind of thing. One day
you get Doc McGee involved and off you go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. yeah, that'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? Oh God.
So when you think about the longevity of the band now, since getting back together, and I guess the reunion album, Hotcakes, and then making several albums since then, and now up to Motorheart, you must have learned things that first time round that have helped you navigate this second phase of the band's career. Would that be fair to say? Are there certain things that you knew going into this when you got back together that we won't make that mistake again?
Yeah, definitely. I think the main thing is focusing on each other and each other's happiness, and listening to each other is an important one. Not being just headlong into everything, saying yes to everything. The happiness is the most important thing, right? Because that didn't matter to me back in the day. I was like, we are going here. I'm dragging you with me. We're doing it. It's like, it's not necessarily that's the builder in me, I suppose. It's more of a case of the people that we employ, the people around us are so important. And the band being happy, sometimes even at the expense of our kind of popularity, like on many levels, is the thing that I'm okay with now. We've had a huge amount of success. I would love to be back in arenas and be a huge band again, but it won't be at the expense of the fun and pissing about and recording things that make us laugh. It's like and doing things that and we finally got management after all these years that really understands the band and really cares about that element of it too, and knows that in a weird way, us being allowed to kind of just piss about all the time is the honesty in the band. That's what keeps it real, and trying to push us into looking a certain way. We had the American management that was fucking awful for a few years around the Hotcakes era, and it was all about kind of American videos and trying to appeal to the American market and dumbing down and getting things mixed by American mixers. It's like, God, like Stars and Striped cat suits. And it's like, God's sake. It's like just, So yeah, I'd say us being able to be us at the expense of us is the most important thing.
There was one thing around that time of Hotcakes, which when I understand that you were diagnosed with testicular cancer. How did that change? Did that change your perspective on life and the band?
Yeah, I mean, I guess no, not really. I'm not going to lie to you. I want to agree with you, but no. For me, it was okay. So I was in there producing and engineering that album, and it was kind of stressful at the time. There was basically, again, it always seems to like scupper us. Like we were happily making an album, just getting to know each other, recording it, and feeling each other out. We needed another year, right? Another year and a half possibly. And then the agent comes in and says, okay, well, everyone's got whiff that you're back together. Download have offered you second from top, of the biggest rock festival in the UK, second from top. And it's like, if we turn this down, might not be an opportunity next year. Again, I'd sort of like to say that we learnt our lesson, but we hadn't at that point still. It was like, yeah, let's do it. So it was like, rush the fucking album through. Same deal. I'm there just stressed out like a bastard, working 17 hours a day. At that point, I'm a father for the second time. 6-month-old and a year and a half old, it's, you could not have any less sleep, chain smoking, just getting through about 100 Diet Cokes a day just to get me through the sessions, working overtime to get it done, for the wrong reason,
Yeah.
Anyway, so then I found that I was in the shower. I'm going to talk graphically about this because I think it's probably good that people would know what to look for. So I'm in the shower and I'm like, something felt a bit uncomfortable. It felt uncomfortable for a few days. But when sometimes you get kicked in the balls in sport, or you just sat weirdly, or when you slip on a pedal on your bike and it's like, and then for a few days it's like, you can just feel it. It doesn't hurt. You just feel something. And I was like, what is that? And then so I had a good old feel of the old members down there, and one of them was had a hard lump and was a bit bigger than the other. I was like, hang on a minute, this isn't right. And it didn't hurt as such, just didn't. And that's probably why I think cancer sometimes goes unnoticed for a while, because something that feels uncomfortable doesn't necessarily ring alarm bells. So I was like, right, let's have a look at this. And then I went online and it was like, oh shit, that's what it is. It's testicular cancer. So I phoned my doctor. I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't tell my wife or anyone. And I was actually up there at the farm, my studio, working on my own at that point, luckily. So got an appointment for the next day, luckily. The NHS probably wasn't in quite such a mess as it is now. But and the doctor... Obviously, it's always a female doctor when it's been the curse of my testicular cancer. Every time I've had to drop my cax, it's been a fairly all right looking woman. Anyway, that's another story. So how's it feel like? Yeah, she's like, yeah, I'm pretty much sure that's what it is. And I was like, yeah, I knew that's what it was anyway. So I'll get you into... I've made a few phone calls. I've got you into the hospital tomorrow. See the consultant. You have a ultrasound thing, and then you go and see the specialist. So, literally I was very lucky. Within 48 hours, I was diagnosed, and then given the date, another 24 hours when they're going to operate. I mean, it's like from going online, going, I think I might have cancer, to it being taken out, cut off, was probably 56 hours maybe, I think. Yeah. And obviously there were some phone calls that need to be made to people, and there's not that much reassurance you can give people once you talk about cancer. It's just people immediately think you're going to die, and I was like, well, I might die, but I didn't really think that would be on the cards. I just thought the main thing is get it out, get this thing out. So I have to say, when I went in for the op, it was the best night's sleep I'd had in years. When they put me out for it, and I actually got my own room in the hospital. Some people pulled some strings and stuff. It was brilliant. I finally got to have a rest, and I was forced to stop. Stop working, stop everything, and I couldn't see the kids for a couple of weeks because of the op. Because they just jump on top of you. So that wasn't ideal. I didn't enjoy that in some ways, but in other ways it was recovery time as well. So they lobbed it out, and then I just didn't think anything else of it. I had the chemo up there in the studio on my own, and during the making of hotcakes, I was the only thing that could take my mind off of how rough I felt was working. Right. So I was there on my own, working on the backing tracks and Pro Tools editing and stuff like that. It just took my mind away from it, because I was lucky enough to be young enough to handle the strongest dose of chemo that you could have. So, there are different types of chemo you have for various different cancers. The one for that particular cancer, and because of my age, they could give me the blast of the strongest one in one single day, something that would kill, say, a 65-year-old in ailing health sort of thing. So it was pretty intense, but yeah, it was fine. And I didn't for a second really think about it was just right, and I think that's the thing with, the way I suppose I approach my life is you just deal with the hand you've got and just look to the future and look for the positives, So I was just happy to have some sleep. happy to be able to get on with a load of editing stuff on the record that I was going to have to do before I sent it away to be mixed. So it gave me a nice head start on that at my leisure. Got some sleep.
It's a great attitude. Like, it's a lot of inner strength there to do that.
Yeah, I also thought as well, I'll be able to fit into the tight trousers that sometimes have been a struggle. That cucumber can just slip straight in there for live now. It's got its own space. Yeah, but cut to 6 weeks later after the chemo and all the blood tests and that kind of stuff, and MRI scans and stuff, they finally look at everything and they report back as to whether the cancer had spread through the lymph nodes to elsewhere. And I was in the car with my wife and got the phone call from the consultant saying, it's all okay. You're going to be fine, I mean, I've had 10 years of checkup appointments since, but
Sure.
But that was a big one because I literally hadn't even thought about it. I'd just been piling for 6 weeks, just piling on, just carrying on, not worrying about it. Yeah. And then when that phone call came in and it was on speaker and my wife was in tears and I was like, oh my God, yeah, this is quite significant. Because it was the first time I realized this could have gone the other way.
Right. Yeah.
I hadn't even given it a thought that it could have spread. And that was what everyone else was worried about for the last 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So this phone call was like, oh yeah, I should probably phone people up and tell them that it's all going to be all right. Because I couldn't give a shit, But yeah, so,
wow. Okay.
I'd say if anyone has any dealings with it, in any way, shape or form, I would suggest you can't change anything by worrying about it. You just can't, so you just got to crack on and do what you need to do. And it is what it is,
Yeah.
Life is life, as Opus
That's
once sang.
Dan, we're almost out of time, so very last thing. Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Are there people you give credit to for helping you get where you are?
Oof. Yeah, too many people to mention, really. It's you always put a lot of things down to luck and chance meetings and things that people did for you at certain points in your career. But really, I think it's like the dogged determination to see it through, to be good at what you do, no matter what happens to you. I think I would have to attribute to my dad, who's been the biggest influence in a positive way and also the biggest pain in my ass as well, because of the things I've inherited from him.
Right.
Like a dog with a bone springs to mind. But yeah, so I'd say my mum and dad really for that moment when I did leave school and their belief in me. They always said to all of us that any job, any skill that anyone has, you can have if you work hard enough. And I always say that to my kids. I say, like, anything you want to be, if you want to be an astronaut, this is how you do it. Get your grades in science, get yourself to Cambridge, sign up for NASA now, know everything you need to know about it, know everything that can be known about it, and throw yourself in at the deep end. And I get that from my parents. So, they weren't even slightly worried when I switched from being an English teacher to a bum in Camden, because they knew that I was going to give it my all.
Nice. And your mum sounds like an incredible woman, hanging out with Brian Jones and Jimi Hendrix in the 60s.
Yeah, 100%. She's so stylish, I saw her last week and it's just like, you never know what she's going to look like. She has this thing like Justin. Justin is my mum, right, and I am my dad, basically. Okay. Probably why we get on. So, and she's so flamboyant, and you never know what haircut she's got, what hair colour, what glass. Never know. Is she going to be a goth this week, or seriously, it's like it's a bit. I think Justin's a bit like that. He's just constantly morphing into
sure,
trying out different things. She's very creative.
Yeah, nice one. Dan, thanks so much for your time, mate. It's been so great to chat with you.
Yeah, sorry if I've been waffling. As I say, catch me this time in the morning after 3 espressos, and this is what you get.
No waffle at all. It was awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Nice to see you.
Good
Thanks,
day, mate.
Rod. Take care, man.
You too, mate.
Nice talking to you.
And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. A big thanks to Dan for his time, and thank you for listening. And just a reminder that The Darkness's new album, Motorheart, is out now. If you have any feedback on the show or suggestions on who you'd like me to interview, or even if you just want to say hello, please drop me a line at humansofmusic@jaxsta.com. That's humansofmusic, one word, at Jaxsta, JAXSTA.com. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to Jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.